Arrived here 25 years later with his wife Annie and son Bill Jr., little did anyone realize that this beach would never be the same, nor would the world of motorsports. Hi everyone, I'm Bob Jenkins, and welcome to a special edition of ESPN's Checkered Flag, a tribute to Bill France Sr. While many people dream great dreams, few have the opportunity to see them come alive. But Bill France did. The founder of NASCAR made the name Daytona synonymous with speed and made stock car racing the most popular form of auto racing in America. In the next half hour, we'll take a look at the legacy William H.G. France has left behind with his passing at age 82 on June 7th, 1992. And we'll speak with some of the people that his life has touched. Bill France had the reputation of being a good race driver, a man who enjoyed racing, but also a worker, planner, and organizer who wanted to bring some order to the chaotic world of stock car racing in the 30s and 40s. He promoted races on the beach as well as dirt tracks around the South, then organized and presided over a meeting at the Streamline Hotel here in Daytona Beach in 1947 that led to the formation of NASCAR, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. In its early days, NASCAR sanctioned racing in the strictly stock car division, modified, and sportsman. Even in the early days, France recognized the value of corporate involvement and sponsorship. And following Marshall Teague's win on the beach in 1951, he made a call to Detroit to drum up support for his stock car division.
Bill called me on the phone in 1951 and said, "Did you know that a Hudson won the beach race yesterday?" And I said, "What beach race?" Because I had never heard of Daytona Beach Race. And he said, "Down here at Daytona Beach. Don't you know anything about this?" And I said, "No." And he said, "We had a stock car race yesterday, and Marshall Teague won." And I said, "Well, gee, that's nice." And I hung up, and it didn't do anything about it for 4 or 5 days. And he called me back, and he said, "What's the matter with you? Aren't you going to do anything about Marshall Teague? He won the race. Don't you remember that?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember that, but I don't think it's very important to us. We don't build race cars. We build automobiles." And he said, "Well, it's a damn good one, and you better get busy."
When he put racing into an organized manner, there were many race drivers that were running for what they thought were guaranteed purses, and they get through at the end of the race and the money was not there. And that's the reason NASCAR was formed, was to bring organization to it, to protect the participants so that they would know they'd get paid after the race was over. And I think that initial step was the greatest thing that he did.
I remember one time when down in Daytona Beach, we were running the beach and road course, and he had this problem with people trying to sneak in without paying, and this was west of the beach road course where they had it, and they had to come through quite a bit of palmettos. And so he had this problem, and he couldn't seem to stop all these people from sneaking in, so he went down to the sign maker, and he had huge signs painted, "Danger, snakes in this area." He cut the problem out entirely. Everybody came around and paid bought their ticket at the gate.
When we return to this special edition of ESPN's Checkered Flag, we'll move inland about 10 miles to the Daytona International Speedway, one of Bill France Sr.'s greatest accomplishments.
It was a clear, beautiful day. We had a large crowd and sold out of tickets. It was a great race. And it was the first time anybody ever realized that you needed a photo finish camera for a 500-mile race.
Covering 455 acres with 31-degree banking in the corners, a 3.5-mile road course, and a 2.5-mile tri-oval, Daytona International Speedway is an engineering marvel. It was all the idea of Bill France Sr., and like most other great ideas, it came about in a simple manner.
Well, this was just in the thinking stage, and Bill and I were in Raleigh, North Carolina, to go to a race, and we were at the Sir Walter Raleigh Hotel and having breakfast with a group of racing people, and Fonny Flonk was there. And Bill took a breakfast dolly and he turned it over and he said, "Fonny," he said, "I want to show you something. I got a new design for a track we're going to try to build in Daytona." And he drew for the first time, to my knowledge, the famous tri-oval of the Daytona racetrack. And he said, "Now, Fonny, this is going to be the same size as Indianapolis, and we're going to have ultimately the same seating capacity." And he went on to describe his dream. And old Fonny looked at it, and Bill said, what do you think about that, Fonny? And Fonny said, well, he said, that sounds great, Bill. He said, but let me tell you just one thing, make it dirt. So Bill's dream was the super speedway. Fonny was the infancy of racing at that time on dirt tracks. That's as far as his vision went, but Bill had a greater vision.
When Bill was building Daytona, he knew he had to have some special cars for that racetrack. So he got with John Holman, and he got Holman and himself, and they come up with a great idea of building race cars, and they got some 59 Thunderbirds they got, and they called it a $5,000 complete car ready to race. And with the tires, it was $5,500. And Bill had 25 of these cars built by John Holman because he foresee what was going to happen with this here speedway. We didn't. The drivers, you know, like myself and Lee Petty and a bunch of other drivers, we did not know what drafting was, but France did. And when we first went out there, boy, you know, you heard these here cars whistle around the racetrack and body slamming each other and pushing each other, and that was the greatest race of all, the first race of, 1959.
The next decade, Bill France had another vision, some thought even more ambitious than Daytona. The site, Talladega, Alabama. It was his second engineering marvel, but a major hurdle had to be crossed before the first race was to be run. It was to be one of his stiffest challenges.
It was a really difficult situation. There are a lot of stories that I guess still haven't been told about that. You know, my car was one of the ones that had had a couple of tire failures already. And the first tire failure I had did virtually no damage to the car. But the second one did a lot of damage to the car, and I had only run just a few laps. And I went straight to Bill. And, you know, I'm sure that nobody in the world knows this right now, but I'll tell you honest, I went straight to Bill and I said, Bill, we have to slow these things down. Why don't you put a committee together to wire the back barrels closed on everybody's carburetor? Let us use only the front. We'll still go 185 miles an hour. And he was really angry that I even said that to him. And he turned to me and he said, if you're scared, don't run.
But anyway, on Saturday before the first race, which was a Talladega 500, some of the teams that wound up boycotting were still around. And Bill, well, of course, we called him Mr. France. Bill borrowed a Winston Cup car, I'm not sure whose it was, but he buckled on his helmet, climbed in that car, and drove it around a lap around that 266-mile speedway. Came back, got out, and somebody told him, I guess, that he'd run 176 miles an hour. And he said, if a 60-year-old man could get in a car and run 176 miles an hour, surely that they could get in there and run 20 miles an hour faster.
And he came over and talked to me after the race. I'd ran the race on Saturday, and he asked me if I'd run the race on Sunday. And in the meantime, the other association had asked us not to. And, you know, talking to Mr. France and everything, we decided to run it. And he gave me, at that time, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. And it wasn't a great deal today, but then it was a lot of money to me. And that enabled me to go buy my first piece of land to build my shop on. And I've always been very loyal to the France family since.
In the early 1970s, stock car racing was losing support from the factories in Detroit. But a new player was in the wings. The R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company brought marketing experience and the needed dollars to form what is now one of the longest-lasting business sporting partnerships in the United States.
His vision was, hey, if we just have 30, we can have 30 Super Bowls. And today, I'm still amazed because he was telling me about these visions back in the middle 70s. And all of a sudden now, you know, you have to buy a ticket to Daytona this year to get a seat next year.
It was common knowledge that Bill Jr. would eventually fill his father's shoes as president of NASCAR. But in 1972, many were surprised when Big Bill passed the reins at the age of 62.
Although Bill France Jr. was ready then and has done one wheel of a job, I think Bill knew, well, if he stumps his toe, I'm there to pick him up. And fortunately, he never stumped his toe. And both Bill Jr. and Jim France, who've learned from their father and their mother, were ready, and he knew it, and so he started enjoying life a little earlier than most people would with a career like that.
Fishing pole one time, it had a fin or a reel on it, which is still considered one of the good reels. And I'm still using that rod and reel today. He got me liking fishing, and here was this nice deep seal or deep sea rod and reel all set to go, and I was just as excited as a kid in a candy store. But basically, we had a great great rapport. He was always willing to turn you loose, and he was pretty good about letting you make some mistakes, particularly if they weren't going to sink the ship, because you learn from making mistakes, and versus getting told that this won't work. You're better off in some respects to go out and make the mistake. You remember that one.
Never seeking the limelight, but virtually the backbone of the France family and organization, Anne France preceded her husband in death in January of this year. It was a marriage partnership that lasted over 60 years.
My mom was a large influence on our family also, and she was more of a conservative approach, where Dad was more of a promotion-oriented, and I think we picked up some good attributes from both of them.
The two of them came to Pocono a few times, and I got to know her in that respect, because we would sit in a little motorhome or what, and maybe talk about business, and she would clue me. I was really a novice, and she was the pro, and I listened very closely to all she had to say.
There were times in the early days of the France family when there was the building of the Daytona International Speedway, and back in those days when he had people rally around him to lend him money, and he had employees that were working for him at the time, where I know, just in talking to many of them, that there were times he would say, we're not going to be able to take care of you this next week, but don't worry, we will. And those people will tell you today that are still with us, that they not only were taken care of then, they're still being taken care of.
Forget the Daytona International Speedway, forget NASCAR, forget everything. He was a person who loved people. He absolutely, and I emphasized this several times, and it's what I loved about him, because I've certainly met many politicians who forget where they came from after they're elected, people who are successful in business who forget where they came from. Bill France never forgot that. He always loved Daytona Beach, and he treated Daytona Beach to the best and the people in it.
We'd go out fishing, and I'd get back, and I'd be cleaning the fish and bringing them in. He'd be in there mixing drinks for everybody and grading up coleslaw and getting the oil hot to fry fish. We'd get everything ready. Well, after I was finished with that, he'd be out there roaming around the dock, and pretty soon, instead of 6 people for dinner, we'd end up with 12 or 15. So I knew to cut plenty of fish, because we had a large upper deck on the boat, and he'd sit up there, well, come on over, where are you from? And I mean, he never met a stranger. Everybody loved him. You spend 5 minutes with him, you'd think you'd known him for years.
In Bill France Sr.'s 82 years, he met many people, and the impressions he made were lasting ones. His life had many facets, and through his engaging personality, he made many friends.
Well, the first time that I remember going to Daytona was in 1955, and I was 20 years old, and like any 20-year-old that's headed for Daytona Beach, you know, the idea of the surf and just the good times in Daytona that it was already known for was appealing. But the idea of running cars and racing and all that was just doubly exciting, and we wanted to see what really went on. Just prior to that, in the early 50s, we had heard through the grapevine that Bill had been up here to the Speedway, and that AAA, who was the sanctioning body at that time, had not been too friendly or too helpful or He did not either get to go into the pits or was asked to leave the pits or whatever the story was. We thought that was kind of unfair. After all, that we all are interested in the sport of racing and we all should get along. So Eddie and I kind of took it upon ourselves to be ambassadors of goodwill and see if we could find Mr. France and kind of tell him that, you know, we really did want him to come up and see our plan and be a guest. And he was most gracious, and someone, it could have been Chris Economaki, introduced us to Bill, and he was most gracious.
One of the things that I recall about Bill France Sr. occurred in 1957 when we took a car, the Hot Rod Magazine special, down and ran on the beach course when they were running the beach trials. We set the fastest speed, fortunately. It was a Plymouth, 1957. And afterward, they told us we had to go to the impound. So we waited, and we ended up at the impound. And then progressively, their officials, one at a time, came over to check us to see if the car was legal. It finally ended up that only Bill France could make the decision, and the decision had to do with the fuel check on the thing. So we took the cap off our little gas tank that we had. Bill put his finger down into the tank, sniffed it and said, "Yep, that's gas." And that solved that thing. That made it a legal run. And I think that was an indication of who the man was.
When I started scoring races for him for $20 a race, he didn't pay me that night. He had to wait until he made his settlement with the track operator, the owner, and get his settlement done, and then he would either bring me my 20 down to Spartanburg or leave it with Joe Littlejohn on his way back to Florida.
It was at Daytona back in the 70s, and the preacher that was supposed to deliver the invocation for the race didn't show up. So Big Bill had the microphone, and he decided to pray himself. And he started praying. And he prayed and prayed and prayed. He asked for the Lord to bless everything that you can imagine. And finally, he couldn't think of anything else to pray for. And he knew it was time to stop. He had to get the race started. And he couldn't remember one word. The crowd started buzzing during the silence. And of course, irreverent press box, people were giggling, and some of them were even rolling in the floor. And finally, Big Bill knew he had to do something, and he ended the prayer at long last by saying this: "Sincerely, Bill France."
I got here and people were laughing. They said, well, Big Bill had the prayer. I said, that's wonderful. And they said he closed it with, "Sincerely yours, Bill France." And then Anne France, his wife, said, he came into the office and he said, "Annie B, what's the word you use to close a prayer?" And she said, "Amen." He said, "Damn, I couldn't remember." So the next race, I closed the prayer with "Sincerely yours, Hal Marchman," because I thought that was a better closing than "Amen."
I started doing PA at racetracks, which had nothing to do per se with NASCAR. But once at Atlanta, I was doing a broadcast down there, and something came up about the caution flag. It didn't come out when it should have or whatever, and I basically said on the PA that NASCAR had screwed up. And a few minutes later, the door flew open into the PA room, and there's this guy that's about 3 times tall as I am, said, "Boy," I knew who it was. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Come out here a minute." So I went out there. He said, "We don't screw up, son." He said, "If we make a mistake, we'll come and tell you." He said, "Do we read each other?" And I said, "Yes, sir." But he scared me to death because I figured my career was over right then.
There was no stock car racing when Bill France came on the scene. It was big cars, midgets, and jalopy racing. But Bill France changed all that and made stock car racing into one of the most popular forms of American sport. The first thing he did was guarantee prize money. And then he formed NASCAR to see that the drivers had a set of rules they could live by, and those rules were enforced. And also formed a point fund. a few $100 the first year. Last year, $1 million to the champion. And for me personally, the wonderful thing he did for me was force me out of television in 1961. He would not let ABC do the Firecracker 250 unless they put someone on the show that knew which way the cars went. And they said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Chris Economaki." I'll miss him.
This special edition of Checkered Flag, a tribute to Bill France Sr., has been brought to you by Smooth Bush Beer and Easy Drink and Bush Light, and by Quaker State. The Big Q is one tough motor oil.
It's truly a unique individual. He was a man that created a sport and then created an empire. When comparing him to other legends in sport, it's tough to draw a parallel with any one individual. He was on a first-name basis with presidents, royalty, and chief executive officers of major corporations, but he never forgot the fans that paid their way to make stock car racing go and grow. The world of motorsports will never know another figure like him. Now, as powerful as this man was, he enjoyed some of the simple things in life. Bill France could often be found playing the ukulele and sitting on his boat singing his favorite song, Galway Bay. We leave you now with that song and some final thoughts from the people that he meant so much to.
NASCAR could be France. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what it was. It could be Big Bill France.
He promoted, he knew how to do it, a fantastic man.
I know he probably got out of his car there and kicked around a little bit, and he said, "You know, the weather's nice down here, and I bet I could have a race down here in February."
Without the help of Bill Sr., the guidance, and the faith, ARCA probably would not be where they are today.
His philosophy was, use what you've got now and don't wait.
Bill Sr. didn't have two sons, he had three, because I felt like really that I was one of his sons too.
See, like I called Bill Dad. He was a father to me. In fact, he was more like a real father to me.
In his latter days, you know, his favorite expressions were, "Well, it ain't all bad," and you know, he loved everybody. He really did.
I'd say, in summarizing him, if anybody could live two lives in one, he did.